Hey everyone, and welcome to the third time's the charm. You haven't seen it, but we've tried it 3 times now. Welcome to the Kubeflow community meeting for the 30th of November and 1st of December. First off is James, who's going to be presenting the Kubeflow pipelines roadmap for 2022. Awesome.
All
Hopefully
right,
you
cool.
can all see my screen.
Yeah, so now you can hear me, hopefully. Okay, cool. Thanks, Matthew. So my name is James Wu. So I'm one of the tech leads in Kubeflow pipeline project. So can you flip on to the next slide, please? Yeah, so we're going to be just focusing on a couple of things in the next year. So obviously, KFP v2 project has been running a while, and I think in the next year, we have a plan to ship a alpha version of KFP v2 early next year, but obviously there's more works that's needed to bring KFP v2 to production quality. So basically, on backend, front end, and SDK, we're going to push, KFP v2 towards maturity. And the key thing is, enable, the v2 authoring CUJs. That includes, I think one of the CUJs is kind of already available through the KFP v2 compatible mode. But the other CUJs are, the containerized Python components and bring your own container, and also being able to author the DAGs as a component. So these are kind of the main CUJs that are remaining right now on the SDK side, and obviously there's the backend and front end work to go with it. The other thing is, finalize on the IR and the component packaging format to address some of the feature gaps with V1. So as you probably, if you have played around with the V2 compatible mode, you might have noticed some feature gaps. But basically, yeah. So a lot of effort is going to spend on KFP v2 to drive that towards a good release. And after KFP v2, so and this is a somewhat tentative. So we've been receiving kind of customer requests, and some of them are actually very good suggestions, such as local development. So our customers are asking, what is the best practice of developing, not only debugging, but also developing pipelines and components, and how do I test and debug right locally before I kind of push that into production. The other thing we're contemplating is to give the DAG UI a facelift. So we actually, so you probably know, the Google also offers a managed service for pipelines, and we have been receiving a lot of good feedback around the DAG component, the DAG visualization, and it's actually quite fancy and polished. So we're thinking maybe there's some opportunities to kind of also bring that to the open source world. And finally, there's advanced control flow features, such as fan-in is one example, and I think we have customer requests for that. We just didn't have time to kind of address it. So, but this is more, I think right now it's a bit more tentative right now. So I think the V2 work, including all the stabilization testing, will probably take us maybe towards Q2. So yeah, so let's maybe flip to the next slide, and I'll start taking questions. So the timelines is roughly, in August last year, we delivered the V2 compatible mode. Right now, towards end of this year, we will be releasing the beta version of the SDK v2. And what that means is all the v2 classes in the SDK are going to be cleanly separated from the v1 kind of SDK classes. And so that kind of gives us a sort of hermetic namespace for v2. And there will be some breaking changes in this shift. Namely, if you were using kind of the old v2 compatible classes, they're not going to, you basically need to update your imports from v1 to v2 to use these new v2 classes. So hopefully the migration is not too painful. But before the end of the year, we're planning to release the v2 beta version of the SDK. And then obviously, Q1 next year, trying to push out the V2 backend in alpha state. And then I guess throughout, Q1 and Q2 will be kind of adding features and rounding off the rough edges of the release, and tentatively probably the V2, the V2 kind of GA, quote unquote GA version of the release. Tentatively is probably somewhere in Q2. And there's after the V2 GA, like I said, there's a bunch of new features that we're contemplating right now. So yeah, so that's basically what we're thinking about next year in terms of KFP. Yeah, happy to take any questions.
Feel free to unmute and ask questions if you have any, or post them in the chat. Otherwise, we can wait until the end of the meeting and follow up any questions people have.
Sounds good.
Awesome. Okay, so you just close that. So if you want to add that to be public so that people can find these slides in the notes, so everyone can find them. That's
sure.
Cool. Or if you're able to, I don't know if you're able to.
Yeah, I can only share with Kubeflow Discuss, unfortunately.
That's fine. That's fine.
Yeah. Oh, I
know. So to everyone, what that means is to be able to see the slide deck here, you have to be in the Kubeflow Discuss mailing list, which is pretty easy to join.
You can also just request access. I know.
Well, I don't know if you want to do that to yourself. Okay, cool. Now there's a few other
just one question here, James, on the V2 alpha timing. So that is similar to the 1.5 timing a bit. Is that, are you thinking the V2 alpha release, would be at the beginning or the end of February? I guess the end of February.
Yeah. So if the timeline aligns, it's not intentional at all.
Well, it'd be a good idea to have any big features in 1.5.
Yeah, I mean, if it works out, and you could finish all the testing and stuff like that. Yeah, I think that's probably a good idea to include in the 1.5. I just wouldn't block 1.5 on V2 alpha at this point. Yeah.
Understand.
Anything else, Josh?
No, I'm trying to summarize this into like the top 3 things. I think you gave it to us on the first slide, so I'll just review those notes and go from there. I do appreciate, although the one thing that if you could sum up a bit of the user benefit in just a couple of sentences for this. I know I'm putting you on the spot, but as you look at these changes that are bringing in, is this what would you say the top user or the top user or the top operator benefits are going to come out of this?
Yeah, I can maybe also attach some links where I think we talked about KFP V2 in previous KFP community meetings. But basically, to summarize, one top benefit is that we're more kind of integrated with metadata tracking. First of all, on the SDK level, so all the inputs and outputs are kind of synchronously tracked with metadata. So and also you could, through the SDK, you could easily add metadata to the artifacts that's been generated by each component. So the SDK supports classes where you can use a very Pythonic way to inject metadata into the system. So that's one. I think that's one big benefit, and it opens the door for later on if we want to do things like the metadata-driven pipelines some advanced scenarios, I think would benefit from this change. The other thing is, I think the UI would actually look a lot better after this change. The current UI is a bit old and actually pretty clunky if you have loops, for example. Basically the entire loop is kind of unfolded on the UI, whereas I think the current UI has a much better design. And if we could actually do the facelift project, we're still trying to figure out if that's possible from an open source perspective. But if we gotta try to do that, I think it's going to be a great improvement, right, over the user experience.
It's not on your roadmap, but I just want to ask a question about if you're doing any sort of big refactor of the services, there are like a lot of current deployments associated with pipelines. Is there any way that we could like reduce that number down from like 8 or 9, and especially the ones that are in each namespace? Because there's no real need for that, right?
So I'm not sure what you meant.
So each Kubeflow, when you deploy Kubeflow pipelines, there's like 8 deployments involved, like deployments as in like pods, you know what I mean? In the main Kubeflow namespace. And then there's
like services?
Yeah, sure, if you want to call them that. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then there's also 2 in each namespace, like this archive server and other things. I think that, and so in every profile gets 2 as well. And I feel like that's not really it's more like just it's easier to maintain, I think, for people.
Yeah, it's not an explicit goal, but I think we are gonna like retire maybe 1 or 2 services that previously existed. Yeah, but that's it. It's not a like explicit design goal so far.
Yeah, especially the main one that I just think is unnecessary is the deployment in every single profile, because we're using Istio, so you can use cross namespace stuff.
Okay, so you're saying we're using what?
You've got an instance of the of like a special version of the archive server or something in each namespace. But if we're using Istio, I mean, we may not be using Istio in the same way in pipelines for most people, but like it is possible to not need those if we can route between namespaces using Istio. That's all I'm saying. Anyway, just interesting idea. Anyone else got any questions for James? Cool. I think we'll move on for now. If you've got any more questions, we'll ask them again. Thanks, James. So there's a couple more items. I'll just list them out before we move on. So there's lots of discussion around the release team for 1.5. Come back to that. There's a plan to remove distribution-owned documentation from kubeflow.org, targeting February 1st. We'll discuss that more in a minute. I've made a bunch of PRs that still need to be merged. Most of them have been merged now, but there's still a couple of big ones, and I keep adding more big ones. I'm sorry. But we'll come to those later. I've got some requests. If you happen to be watching and want to contribute to the website, here's some good places you could do that. If you're good at writing copy, or if you're good at CSS or whatever. And obviously Josh wants to remind everyone that there are roadmap presentations, just like the one you've just heard from pipelines. And I think the Peritus guys, I don't know what the update is there, but hopefully we'll talk about that once we get to it. So most important thing, I think, is the 1.5 release team. And I just want to clarify that I believe that the consensus among the community has been that the proposal I raised is a reasonably good idea, and that's brought out by the fact that people have been agreeing both in the email thread. Well, this is actually the recall for nominations, but the email thread here, and the issue that I raised because I had some concerns about the way we're forming these teams. But the short of it is that we did all agree that we will take more nominations, and that's the thread to do it. So if you've got nominations for people, either yourself or others who want to be in the Kubeflow 1.5 release team as like a voting member, anyone can attend the meetings. You need to be nominated here. And I think an important clarification is that everyone who's existing in the team does need to be nominated again, just to make sure that they pass that very low bar of having one independent person agree with their nomination. meaning independent in the sense of not from the same company. So like, it's a very easy bar to clear. If you can't pass that bar, you shouldn't be running the release, if not even one other person in the community agrees with your voting rights. So, yeah, anyone want to raise concerns there? I know that there's been a bit of back and forth from Kimonos, but not much from anyone else, other than people agree.
Yeah, there is concern here. And I'd like to make a point of order that traditionally we have had the working groups kind of manage their own environment. And typically we don't ask another working group to approve when there's a change in the leadership in a working group.
These are not working groups, and they were never, so the release team is not a working group. And
yes, that's true. Sorry, I was still speaking.
You good?
So in the vein of an organization, right, the way that Kubeflow is organized, it's the people who are doing the work who are designed to make the decisions, right? This is kind of the way that it's been formed. And I'd like to clarify, because I think there was some misperception, that the release team is, at least from my observation, the most transparent organization in the community. Every meeting is documented. Every meeting is recorded. Every role is documented. And for that matter, I think that the release team has been able to deliver a very high quality. They've improved because they've adopted these processes, self-managed, just like all the other working groups and all the other organizations. They are self-managed by the leaders of that group. Now, many of the organizations that we have are not diverse or have very little diversity in them. You can go through the working groups and you can look at the chairs or the leads and the people that attend most of the meetings, and there's one or maybe two organizations that dominate each of those organizations. On a whole, we have a lot of different diversity when you look at all the different groups. But each organization tends to have one or two organizations that primarily are the leaders of those organizations.
Do you want to make any more statements there?
So the point is that when we talk about diversity, right, the community is diverse, but each of the organizations are less diverse than the organizations. Each of the organizations by design are designed that the people that are doing the work are making the decisions. And in the meeting that we have had, which have all been documented and all have been recorded, right, and all have been communicated, we have taken the input from the community and we have provided feedback back. Now, my point of order on this is the people who are in the leadership position of that organization should be determining what the process is and reporting back. And that's the way that it would be consistent with what we do with all the other organizations in the community.
There's two main points that I there's like a hill that I'm willing to die on here. Like that is, the working groups are completely distinct from the release team. They are in, and the point of a release team is to represent the entire community, whereas the purpose of the working groups is to own a piece of the project. If the release team doesn't represent the whole community, people will stop contributing.
Okay, so what is the complete community? Because if you say that only the working groups get to decide, what about the distributions, and what about all the other users that are involved from what the release team does? How are they represented?
Well, that is, well, again, don't throw out the baby with the bathwater. Yes, they should have a voice, no question. But going the complete opposite direction would be even weirder, right? Like what you're suggesting is that we allow, are you suggesting that we have what is effectively a perpetual release team, which is unelected? They get to decide how the next release team comes, and where there is no actual way to change the members of that release team. Is that what you're suggesting?
That's not what we have suggested. And I think that this can dive into a very long discussion, but I do believe that the release team should be trusted to develop a process to bring in new members, because they have delivered the highest quality of any release that we have had to date.
Let's set aside those sort of comments that are not really relevant to the
Well,
structure.
I prefer not to set aside the quality aspect of this, Matthew, because we did have a struggle with quality a few releases back. And I think it's very important to recognize that we have had, and we must acknowledge the people that did the work, and that they should receive some acknowledgement of trust that they have a plan and they are documenting their plan. It is very transparent. So, and if people want to come and make contribution and suggest changes, it is in the release team that should be being done, and not outside of the outside organizations can provide comments, and we acknowledge them and we will work with them. But it's the release team that, just like all the other working groups, that decide how the transitions work. When we change people in the Kubeflow pipelines, when we change people in the distributions, there is not a big vote from a bunch of other folks.
I do really want to hear from other people. Of course, I mean, a lot of people have already commented that they agree with my proposal, which is that the release team is a transient entity that is formed for each release. Pretty much everyone, in fact, who responded to the thread said that's a good idea. I'm interested if anyone else on the call wants to make a comment on this, if they have a comment publicly.
So I think I made some comment in here. So basically, I think there should be a mechanism, right, to bring in new people, and I think the release team has taken that feedback, right, into sending more public announcements and whatnot. The question I have maybe is in terms of like the shadow mechanism that the release team is proposing. So I did not know that this was something that the Kubernetes organization also uses. And I think if that's something, I trust that the release team has studied, what the Kubernetes team is doing. So I think that mechanism seems reasonable to me. If there is a concern around diversity or more kind of inclusivity, so I guess my view is either someone or nominate himself to join the group or the release team, or or not, right? So the working group. So I guess one thing I propose is, like, if we end up with a release team that's heavily dominated by one way or the other, then the working group has to provide basically resources to fund the release team. Otherwise, they would just have to approve whatever composition that is basically that we end up with. So I guess the point is, you either kind of participate and contribute to the diversity or not, and then you should approve what the release team is. So that's my philosophy. And regarding like seconding the nomination, I actually don't feel that's super needed. Maybe, as you said, it's a very low bar, so maybe it's just a formality. But also, like, I feel like we have probably more issues finding, you know, like people who's wanting to contribute to the release team. So I feel like I don't want to raise the bar higher just because. So unless, you know, maybe the next release will prove that we do need, you know, a higher bar for people to join the release team. But unless we have that evidence, I'm willing to just not, you know, to forego the seconding requirement. So
well, again, that's not the whole point here. That whether or not we do seconding, that's a separate discussion, I think. The concept is there's two options. One is that the release team is transient, and the other is that it is so in Kubernetes world, it's not transient. The release team is it's a SIG over there, but it's a working group in our terms. We've got two options. We either formally form a working group for releasing, or we keep it transient each release. I'm not comfortable having a random org appearing without the rest of the working groups agreeing on it, or at the very least, the rest of the community agreeing on it explicitly, not implicitly. So if we want to form a SIG release, let's do it. I'm happy. Let's do that. But let's make sure that when we form it with a sensible constitution, just like we've done with every other working group. There's limits on what powers they have, that there is membership that we all agree on to begin with. And that's all cool. And I think you'll see a lot of people.
I really don't understand why this is a community decision. It should be a working group or a release team decision. I don't understand that. If you want to come to the release team and discuss the proposals with the release team, then that's fine. But I don't see this as being outside of the release team. I think that we deserve the respect. I really do, in the way, because somehow people believe that there's like a huge amount of power or something involved in the release team. The release team has to go out and beg, plead, ask people to do things, right? It is not a place of power. It's a place of somebody who's actually has to work with all of these groups. And I find it just very hard to swallow at this point, Matthew, of what we're trying to accomplish here with all this extra work. If it was off track, I agree with you. But are you telling me that we didn't deliver the best release ever?
I don't think you're understanding me here.
I am really not understanding why you're taxing this small group with all this extra work that you're putting on top of them.
I'm arguing that this group doesn't exist. You keep claiming that there's a release team, but the community has not agreed that there is a release team. As simple as that.
No, it's not. Right now, per the release team yesterday.
The release team, no. You can't say because the release team exists, the release team exists.
We discussed this process.
Well, by default.
And right now, the way I'd like to leave this, Matthew, is that this issue really needs to go to the steering committee.
Yes.
To make a decision of whether the duly qualified release team has been approved, has been set up, or if we're going to follow this new process that you're determining on the fly outside of the process of the release team.
I do not care about the process.
You're inventing as you go along.
I do not care about the process. I just care that there is one that was agreed by the community. And right now that is not the case. If the process
it was probably agreed to by default. I mean, we've had two releases that Ericto's really been in charge of, and they've done a great job. But
I don't think that changed my point.
Maybe the answer is we need to make this into either a SIG or a working group.
Yeah,
I think we're making this way too hard.
I'm not comfortable.
Release team, right?
And I'm not comfortable with your objection here. It raises many red flags. That's what I'm not saying that you haven't done a good job. And I'm not, to be clear, I'm not saying that.
For whom? Where is the red flag? I want to know, where is the red flag in quality? Is someone complaining that they have been treated unfairly in the last releases that have come out since we developed the handbook? We are the most documented, the most transparent, the most recorded organization of any that are here. And we take feedback probably more than any of the other working groups. So I'm not quite sure what the objective of spending all this time.
You're not a working group. I'm sorry to say that. You have not been
point.
formed as a working group. Like,
Well,
and you can't pretend like you are.
We need to make it into
This is not your decision to make.
Well, no, it's not. And I'm just saying, let's make it a working group and let's form it like we did every other one.
What about if you raise where I've seen a lot of emails on this? Is that the main spot where this is all taking place? Is in the emails, or is there a?
Oh, the main spot that this has been taking place is in the release team meetings. Is that because that's the people that are doing the work, and I keep going to that fact is that if people want to come and do the work, we are welcome. We want this to be fun. For some reason, Matthew, there are several issues that you stick your hand in that start to become contentious, and no longer is the community as fun as it was. And I'd appreciate if you would recognize that fact, right? That there have been multiple times now where you have potentially caused consternation. And as we grow the community, we want everybody to be smiling. And quite frankly, the last week and a half, I have not been smiling, right?
Oh, no, sorry, I'll take it all back. You can just run the releases forever now. I don't feel like the community
Not what
wants
we
that.
said, and it's an unfair characterization, and I really appreciate it. If you're going to make comments like that, I would like you to come to the release team.
Oh, I am happy to be a lead on the release team. If you want me to be one, I will be one. But the problem is, I don't want to have just decided that I'm on that team. I want the community to agree with that I'm there. That's what I'm saying. I don't want to force my way onto anything. I don't want anyone to be able to.
My point is, it is not the release. It's not the community's decision. Is the release team's decision as it's been defined by the release team, because they're the ones that have done the work and they've defined the process. And I think that is a fair analysis, and it's in line with the spirit of the community from the very beginning, since we broke up into smaller organizations and pushed the decision-making down to the working group level, right? And now you're saying, no, I'm going to change this.
I'm not saying anything. I'm just saying, let's formalize it.
That's exactly what you're doing.
I'm saying, let's formalize it. That's the only thing I'm saying.
It has been formalized, and it's been in the meetings, and it has been documented.
It's not on the community repo, and it was not approved by the PSG explicitly. So I don't believe it's been formalized. I'm not trying to be silly here. Like if what you're saying is true,
who do you want off the release team at this point?
No, I don't think you understand what I'm saying.
Because you already said that you wanted Kimonis to be leading it. So we're spending an enormous amount of time on something that you've already agreed is probably the best, is the best person to lead it. I don't understand where you're going with all this. You don't think that Kimonis is going to recognize his shadow and bring them in, just as Jeremy and Joshing and Giannis and everybody else handed off this project? I mean, I've watched it go all the way through, right? So I'm not understanding what you're doing here, Matthew.
Yeah, I think it should be pretty clear that all I want is a process that is robust in the long term. And I don't mean a process that was decided by the people who are affected by that process. I mean one where the community has endorsed it and agreed to it. And I don't think that's a very hard ask. What you're saying is correct, and I don't believe it will be very difficult to formalize. I just think that we should.
I don't think community is ready for that, my team, from my perspective.
So can you explain what you're saying?
Like James mentioned before, I don't think we should spend our time by doing this right now at this point in Kubeflow community. And we don't need to focus our time on this, I'm pretty sure.
I don't think it'd be a lot of work. That's what we're saying, though. Because I think
I don't think so. I would not agree. I mean, that requires additional approvals from the steering committee, right? And the steering committee still needs to get approved, right?
Well, that wouldn't be difficult if it's a sensible proposal. I don't think anyone in the steering committee is unreasonable.
But do we need it right now?
Well, whether or not it affects this release, all I want is that there is like the thing that concerns me is that if we don't intentionally do this, it will never happen, or we'll end up in some default thing that just kind of happens.
It will happen when more people come in Kubeflow and will try to contribute. Doesn't matter in release, in the working group, in any sort of the part of the project, right?
This is the sort of thing that will prevent people coming to contribute, because what it will, I'm not saying that, and again, this is to be clear, not to say that anyone's done a bad job, but it's that if companies are purely interested by money, if they cannot come into the project and in exchange for their input, get something from it, they will not join. And one of those
So
things,
I just want to, I want to make sure that the facts bear up what you just said. Right now, I would propose that the release team has more representation than any other organization inside of Kubeflow, right? Than any of the other ones, the working groups, the distribution teams. They have more people from different organizations than anywhere else. And, you know, as for our growth, we continue to welcome in people. Believe me, we want to train people to take over our jobs. That's what we do. So, I mean, I think that we should trust our process from the working level, that we will do the right thing by the community. And if you don't, if you think there needs to be more documentation, I invite you, I welcome you to come to the release team and work within our process and document it with us, and then put it up there and take that on. But do it within the release team, because that's the people that are doing the work. I appreciate all the comments from the community. We take them, we discuss them in depth.
Well, I mean, I'm happy to spearhead the formation of that working group, as long as James believes that the PSG would agree with such a working group being formed. Like a release working group, you know. There was always discussion of that, in fact. It just never formalized.
Well, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. I probably kind of an official opinion here, but I just think what's working quite well so far doesn't seem like there's a problem, actually, to me. If there's a problem of, you know, like a skewed, you know, representation in the release team, there's other ways to address it. Like, I think I had a couple of suggestions there.
I think your main suggestion, and I think this is one that I think we should do before the 1.5 release, is that each company gets one vote if they're on the release team, just to prevent stacking. But
a vote about what?
Or in any like binding decision, you know, in most open source orgs, binding decisions are releases, delays, things like that.
Yeah, so if a working group, you know, use a veto vote, I want that working group to contribute. Otherwise, I think they kind of have no right to veto.
That's absolutely reasonable, of course. But if we do agree that the working groups exist, whether they do exist is a separate question, then they should be and they are the things that comprise Kubeflow. Those are the only logical entities to vote.
I think with the joining of the two, I think, canonical folks, I think the composition is kind of okay right now. So I actually don't see a problem with.
That's fine. I mean, yeah, that's good, and I'm happy to join on as well if we had a third diversity. Again, I'm not saying that anyone's done a bad job. I'm literally just trying to protect the future of the project. That's all I'm trying to do here. Anyway.
I appreciate your vision. I would just ask that you do it within the release team rather than trying to leverage the community or the working group, because it's broader than the community, right? It's broader than the working group. It's broader than the working groups. It's because it includes the distributions, and there are a lot of do-it-yourself end users that rely on the release team.
Well,
right.
I mean,
and somebody has to step up. Somebody has to step up for those guys too.
And that's fine. And that's why we should be very intentional when we form a working group for it, that is part of the charter. And how do we address that? That's one of the concerns that we should be explicitly. So how do we ensure there's representation from distributions? How do we ensure there's representation from users?
We are a very small group. We have 17 weeks to get a release out. There is a huge amount of work that has to be done, including work on trying to automate the tests that are associated with building the manifest. And instead of our teams designing those tests, we're arguing about defending our decisions, quite frankly, in a way that was a little bit, and I'm going to say this word, was a little offensive, Matthew, in the way that it came out, because it could have been handled, I think, in a much different way. And I'd appreciate just a little recognition. And I'll also say that I'm a little too sensitive, right? And I want to have fun. That's why I come here, right? That's why I've stayed here for 3 years. I want to make this fun for everybody, so everybody comes in. And the new people that join the community, the working group, 2 from Canonical, another from a student from India, all of them are excited to help.
Mm-hmm. That's great. And nothing about that. I want to encourage all of that. All I'm talking about here is there's just a few areas where we just need to be really careful about governance. And I think the release process is one of them. And if you look at all the big open source orgs there, the release process is one of the most carefully controlled pieces. Because like you said, something like 17 weeks, like, so who's deciding that? You know what I mean? Like that
the handbook
that's not deciding it
over that. So this is the thing that really aggravates me about
no
this.
I've read your book and I've read your handbook.
That we meet every single week and we discuss all of these process and document them in the release handbook, and this is all public and all recorded, right? It's not like there is any this is all transparent to everyone.
But who's actually attending those meetings? It's like 4 people from Ericto most weeks, up until the last couple of weeks where I've raised these concerns.
But it's the problem of the community, right?
And left. That's not our fault that people don't show up and come. There's a lot of working groups that people don't show up at meetings. So, I mean, you can talk to Andre, and, to Andre's kind of point, the user group contributor role, we brought in a couple new people for him, right, Andre? Didn't we?
Yeah. I mean, yeah, it's a problem of the community. They do not attend the meeting. All the meetings are open, like from all of the working groups, like case serving, like the pipelines, AutoML training. We're like always open for the people, and everyone can join. So I don't see any problems here. Well,
the meetings are open, but it's people might be more enticed to join if they see a clear pathway to them having a voice. Even if that is their, you know what I mean?
A rewarding contribution, and we spent probably 20% of the time today in the release team meeting talking about how do we make the contribution that the new members make rewarding to them. And I think your insights here, because you've been helping a lot of people and a lot of the community in contributing, giving some insights there is probably very valuable for a lot of the working groups, right? Of how do we get more people to contribute and stay involved.
Then the one next action I just want to take, I think we can close this conversation for now. I think there's a lot more to talk about, but I think the one thing I just want to see from it is that we as a community just agree that release team is empowered to make the decisions it's making. That's all I want to see. And maybe that should include just a basic charter which just constrains the rights of that just working group, whatever it's called, just to make sure that there's a bound on how much power they do have. And I'm not saying that they're abusing it right now. I'm just saying that it's one of those things where if there is power, it corrupts. Like, it's just a way humans work. Like, there's money to be made, so people will abuse it. Anyway, anyway, that's the only one thing I want to see. If everyone disagrees with me there, they can overrule me, obviously. That's the whole point. It's a community.
As I said before, from my perspective, at this point, it is not a problem for the community, but I don't know, like what others think. At this point of time in 2021, 1st of December, it's not a problem. I don't know what's happening in the future, but for now, I think we're doing like what we can.
Then I think it would be as simple as just saying to all the working groups, do you agree with the current release team and empower them to do this? Then to say yes. And it would be a very simple vote, like a day, and not even a day.
Most of them are not involved in the release, most of the working groups.
Well, maybe that might make them involved. I don't know.
You can't force people to be involved, right?
Well, that might encourage them though, because it might make them realize that they're the ones giving them the power to do the release. Anyway, it's okay. It's all a game of psychology. Anyway, I think we can move on there. I would still love to see more contributions in the release team, regardless of how it's formed. I don't really care. I more diversity if we can. That's all I really want.
Yeah, I think we kind of achieved that in 1.5 release at least. So I'm okay with the current composition.
Cool. I would love to step up and join as well if someone wants to, if that would be willing. If I think I can help with things like the docs. I've been doing a lot on the docs anyway. Okay. The last one here, or the last major item here is, again, we've been planning for a very long time, to remove distribution owned material from the org. It's already happened on Kubeflow manifests. It should probably now happen on the distribution section of the website. It just makes sense to let people own their own docs and we can just link to them. It's also very important that otherwise our certified Kubeflow program has very little meaning, because one of the main benefits of being certified is that you can be linked on the website. And if your docs are hosted on the website, then what does it even mean to be linked? So my proposal is that we, as each of the websites get created, or if they already exist, we just get people to designate them for each of the distributions. We update the installing Kubeflow section table with a link. For now, no certification is necessary. And then on a certain date, February 1st, let's say, we can change that date around if the community wants. We actually remove any remaining distribution docs if anyone's just forgotten to do it. And then we do a redirect to the external website using the redirect so that it doesn't end up with 404s. And I think this will help clean the website up even further as we keep going, make it more maintainable long term. Because the versions of the distributions should not be the versions of Kubeflow, things like that. Well, they can be, but that's the choice of the distribution. Anyway, so anyone want to make any comments here or, things? If not, I guess after a certain point, we'll just say this is consensus and everyone agrees that this is what we'll do on that date. Cool. If you have approver, so mostly just James and other people, I'd love someone to just look at this quick, it's not a quick, but this PR here, because it updates many things that are kind of security risks on the website, including all of Hugo, Doxy, Node.js, and a bunch of other things. But it also enables this new feature of Doxy with the nested sidebar, so it's kind of useful, so it helps browsing the website a lot. So if someone could review that, I would love it. Other than that, there's some other PRs there, but we can work on those independently. Oh, this one is just a quick LGTM actually. If someone could LGTM this, because this is like a it's an incorrect. It was just a PR that I think was accidentally made that incorrectly did authentication to authorization. Sorry, the other way around. That went to that one, which is obviously not a valid resource kind. So that would be incorrect to follow it. Someone could just LGTM that. Other than that, requests for contributions. Here are some ones if you want to look through them, if you're wanting to contribute. Josh, do you want to talk about your presentations? Obviously, we just had one in this meeting.
Just a request to the folks in the working group leads, if they could please find time to do an update. I think it's very valuable for the other working group folks to see what you're planning. I think it's good for the users. It's good for the release team. I think it's very helpful for all of us to kind of coalesce around those. I do have one question actually at the end for James again about, because we were talking about support about Kubeflow 1.20, or I guess it's 122.
Kubernetes, you mean?
So if we can circle back to that maybe after we do the Paratus update, that would be great. I don't know if we have time, but it would be, maybe we're running long.
Cool. Paratus, guys, do you want to give a quick update?
Yeah, so thanks for getting Thea looped in again. So I've answered the questions. I just want to know what else I should be doing. I'm just waiting. So I'm just showing up once every 2 weeks to check in. I know, I do know, like last week in the US was a short week, so I did consider that. So
Yeah, I think Thea was supposed to follow up on this. We have a meeting with her tomorrow, so I can raise this issue again with her
Yeah,
to
thanks.
see if she has any updates. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Awesome.
Right, and the point on this, just to highlight one thing, Santosh, that this is a first mover. You're not saying you want exclusive, or you just want to be able to get the tool into use like you've done with other organizations, and just would like approvals to start moving down that path, right?
Yeah, that's about it.
Cool.
And I think it's wonderful to think about using machine learning on ourselves, right? So
It would make sense.
Probably find out something we don't know about ourselves.
Oh, I don't know if I want that.
I don't know if I want to.
Okay, cool. So you're correct, Josh, that there is some issues with the current manifests for 122. That doesn't necessarily mean that every distribution is not working with 122, but at least the default manifests aren't, I believe.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of dependencies. We started to walk through this, and I don't know if we're going to get to 1.22, but we need to work towards it in 1.5. And you know, both Istio and the cert manager needs to be kind of looked at, and you know, trying to pick those, because those update very quickly. I think Istio 1.11 probably, if I wrote it down in my notes, probably is goes end of life in March or something like that. And the cert manager, like 1.5, if we work with that, would go end of life in December. But I think even 1.6 goes end of life in February. So the challenge is, I just want to give a heads up to the Kubeflow pipelines and all the working groups, so that, you know, if we do want to make 122 available to the groups, if they're blocking issues, just trying to give you guys a heads up as early as possible about the dependencies, and see if you've, like the emissary executor, is that going to be a hard requirement in the 1.5 timeframe, right? Are you guys going that is the default at that time? Those are some questions that might come up.
That's more of an Argo question, really, because it's like the maturity of it on, because that Kubeflow pipelines is just a wrapper around Argo. Obviously, it does other things, but the thing the emissary executor versus Docker versus PNS is the reason they were delaying was because Kubeflow pipelines, that is, was because it wasn't mature enough to use emissary in every cluster yet. James can agree with me there or not, I guess. So it's really a decision for Argo in some sense.
I think we're still fix some, or I guess you hadn't fixed. We're still fixing some bugs towards the, you know, in the 1.4 release. I don't know what the latest status is. I probably need to go check with you. And
because yeah, that would be the only piece other than SDO that would be broken with, well, and some of the manifests being just wrong format, like wrong resource version for one. Because I've got most of Kubeflow working in 122 locally in dev sort of stuff. Yeah. I agree that we should be making through a list of anyone who's breaking it, though. I think that's probably the next step there, right, Josh?
Yeah, I'm just trying to get visibility so people think about it, because it seems like it's far away, but there's a lot of pieces and we need to coordinate a lot of folks. So hopefully there'll be a list of things, a list of dependencies and the challenges that come up. But the more time you get, less vacation time during Christmas you get. No, I'm just kidding. Let's just see if we can keep visibility on it as appropriate.
Yeah, I can definitely look into the SDO stuff because I have solved that locally. I'm intrigued to know what is breaking it, but yeah, okay. Cool. Has anyone got anything else they want to add before we close out the recording? Anyone got any further questions for the pipelines working group? Nope. Okay, cool. I will stop the recording. Thanks, guys.